Who could have known that today would be the first day of a new life for a 22-year-old young man with Down syndrome, all thanks to Morgan Freeman. Jordan was a 22-year-old young man with Down syndrome. In the past, he had gone through tough times because of bullying, but while he was trying to hold on to life thanks to his mother, today Rachel attempted to shatter his hopes. However, Morgan Freeman didn't just change this day, he changed the rest of his life. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains of his modest bedroom, Jordan Adams awoke with a mixture of excitement and anxiety swirling in his stomach. Today wasn't just any Tuesday, it was his first day working at Lakeside Grocery. For most people, a job at a local supermarket might seem ordinary, but for Jordan, it represented something profound: independence, purpose, and the chance to prove himself to a world that had often dismissed him. He ran his fingers over his new name tag, which sat on his nightstand next to a photo of him and his mother. The plastic rectangle with Jordan printed in bold letters might seem insignificant to others, but to him, it was a badge of honor, proof that someone believed he was capable. "Jordan, breakfast is ready, honey," his mother's voice carried up. The stairs, warm and encouraging as always. Sarah Adams had been Jordan's rock, his steadfast defender against a world that wasn't always kind to those who were different. A single mother since Jordan was 3, she had fought countless battles to ensure her son received the same opportunities as everyone else, from proper education accommodations to this very job at Lakeside Grocery. Jordan dressed carefully in his new uniform, khaki pants and a blue polo shirt with the Lakeside logo. He practiced his smile in the mirror, remembering what his mother always told him. "Your smile is your superpower, Jordan. It changes the energy in any room." Downstairs, Sarah had prepared his favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs with cheese and toast cut into triangles. She beamed when she saw him in his uniform. "Look at my handsome man," she said, adjusting his collar slightly. "You're going to do amazing today." Jordan nodded, though doubt flickered in his eyes. "What if I'm too slow, Mom? What if I make mistakes?" Sarah placed her hands on his shoulders, looking him directly in the eyes. "Listen to me, Jordan Adams. Everyone makes mistakes on their first day. That doesn't define who you are or what you can achieve. Take your time, do your best, and remember how far you've come." Her words settled over him like a protective shield. He thought back to the painful days in high school, the whispered comments, the exclusion from birthday parties, the time some boys had tricked him into waiting for a non-existent meetup, leaving him sitting alone at the mall food court for 3 hours until his mother found him. But he also remembered the good, the special education teacher who recognized his gift for memorization, the small group of friends who saw beyond his condition, and the day he'd marched across the stage, a graduation, the crowd erupting in applause that seemed to wash away years of hurt. "I won't let you down, Mom," he said, his voice steady with newfound determination. "You could never let me down," she replied, hugging him tightly. "I'm already proud of you." The drive to Lakeside Grocery was short, but for Jordan it felt like crossing a threshold into a new chapter of his life. The store sat at the edge of town, its large windows reflecting the morning sunlight. Several customers were already filing in, starting their day with shopping lists and coffee cups in hand. Sandra Miller, the store manager, was waiting for him at the entrance. In her late 50s, with kind eyes and silver-streaked dark hair, she had taken a chance on Jordan when other businesses had politely declined his application. "Good morning, Jordan." "Right on time," she greeted, extending her hand. "Ready for your first day?" Jordan shook her hand firmly, just as his mother had taught him. "Yes, ma'am, I'm ready to learn." Sandra smiled, leading him into the store. "That's exactly the attitude I like to hear. We're going to start you on cashier training today. I know you practiced a bit during your interview, but we'll go through everything step by step until you feel comfortable." The store was coming to life, produce being misted with water, the bakery filling with the aroma of fresh bread, other employees arranging displays and restocking shelves. This would be his world now, Jordan realized with a thrill of excitement. Sandra led him to register 7, a bit away from the central checkout area. "I thought you might prefer to start somewhere a little quieter while you get the hang of things," she explained. For the next hour, she patiently walked him through the register system, how to scan items, enter produce codes, process different payment methods, and bag groceries efficiently. Jordan absorbed every detail, his concentration unwavering. The most important thing to remember, Sandra said, is that the customer experience matters more than speed. Yes, we want to be efficient, but making people feel welcome and respected is our priority. Jordan nodded. Seriously, my mom says my smile is my superpower. Sandra chuckled warmly. Your mother is absolutely right. A genuine smile can turn someone's whole day around. As the morning progressed, Jordan observed another cashier, Miguel, handling actual customers. He watched how Miguel greeted each person, made small talk while scanning their items, and thanked them sincerely as they left. Jordan took mental notes, determined to master not just the technical aspects of the job, but the human element as well. After lunch, Sandra decided Jordan was ready to try checking out actual customers with her supervision. His first customer was an elderly woman buying cat food and tea. His hands trembled slightly as he scanned the items, but he remembered to smile and make eye contact. "Is this your first day, dear?" the woman asked kindly, noticing his trainee badge. "Yes, Mom," Jordan replied. "I'm learning everything today." "Well, you're doing just fine," she assured him. "My grandson has Down syndrome too. He's studying art at community college now. You young people are showing the world what you can do." Jordan's chest swelled with pride. "Thank you," he said, carefully placing her items in a bag. "I hope you and your cat have a nice day." The woman beamed at him as she left, and Sandra gave him an approving nod. "Perfect, Jordan. That's exactly how we treat our customers." The afternoon continued smoothly, with Jordan gaining confidence with each transaction. There were a few minor hiccups, a barcode that wouldn't scan, confusion over which produce was which, but Sandra guided him through each challenge with patience. By late afternoon, Jordan was handling customers on his own, though Sandra stayed nearby. Most people were kind, some indifferent, but none had been unkind. For Jordan, who had grown accustomed to the occasional stare or patronizing tone, this normal treatment felt like a gift. As his shift neared its end, Sandra pulled him aside. "I'm impressed, Jordan. You've picked things up quickly, and more importantly, you've got the right attitude. How do you feel about your first day?" Jordan considered the question carefully. "I feel like I belong here," he finally said. "Like I can do this job well." Sandra smiled. "That's exactly right. You do belong here and you will do this job well. There will be challenging days. Every job has those, but I believe in you." As Jordan prepared to leave, collecting his belongings, from the employee locker room, he felt a sense of accomplishment, unlike anything he'd experienced before. He had crossed a bridge today, from dependence to independence, from doubt to confidence. Walking through the store toward the exit, he glanced at his watch. His mother wouldn't be picking him up for another 15 minutes. He decided to wander through the aisles, seeing the store from a customer's perspective. In aisle 3, an older man in a baseball cap was examining a jar of pickles. Something about him seemed familiar to Jordan, but he couldn't place it. The man looked up, met Jordan's eyes, and gave him a warm nod of acknowledgement. Jordan smiled back, continuing his walk through the store, unaware that this simple moment of connection would become significant sooner than he could possibly imagine. Little did he know that this ordinary Tuesday would become the day that changed everything, the first day of his new life. The next morning, Jordan arrived at Lakeside Grocery 15 minutes early, eager to start his second day. The confidence he had gained yesterday bolstered his spirits as he tied his apron and clipped on his name tag. Sandra greeted him with an approving nod. "Ready for day 2?" she asked, handing him his register assignment. "Yes, ma'am," Jordan replied with a determined smile. "I remembered all the produce codes last night." "That's impressive," Sandra said, genuinely surprised. "Most new employees take weeks to memorize. Those—" Jordan didn't mention that he had spent 3 hours the previous evening studying the codes, determined to excel at his new position. For him, this job wasn't just employment, it was proof that he belonged in the world like everyone else. By mid-morning, the store had settled into its usual rhythm. Jordan efficiently handled each transaction, greeting customers with a warm smile that most returned. Some even remembered him from yesterday, offering words of encouragement that brightened his day. "You're doing great, sweetie," an elderly woman told him as he carefully bagged her bread separate from her cleaning supplies. "Much better than that grumpy fellow who was here last week." Across the store, unnoticed by Jordan, the man in the baseball cap from yesterday had returned. Morgan Freeman browsed the wine section, occasionally glancing toward the front registers. He was in town filming a documentary about small-town America, and had found himself drawn to this particular store for its authentic community atmosphere. Today he was simply picking up a few items before heading to the production office. At precisely 11:42 a.m., the automatic doors slid open and Rachel Winters strode in, her high heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. At 38, Rachel was the kind of woman who commanded attention: designer clothes, perfectly styled blonde hair, and an expression that suggested perpetual dissatisfaction. As the marketing director for a major corporation, she had built her career on efficiency and perfectionism, traits that had served her professionally but had gradually seeped into every aspect of her life. Today, Rachel was already running behind schedule. A morning meeting had gone long. Her lunch appointment was in 30 minutes and she still needed to pick up items for the dinner party she was hosting that evening. Her phone buzzed incessantly with emails demanding immediate attention. "For heaven's sake," she muttered, narrowly avoiding a child reaching for a candy bar. The mother pulled the child closer, shooting Rachel an apologetic look that went unacknowledged. Rachel moved through the store with practiced efficiency, placing items in her basket without breaking stride. Her frustration grew as she navigated around slower shoppers, each one an obstacle in her carefully planned day. "Excuse me," she said sharply to an elderly man, deliberating between two types of coffee. The man, Morgan Freeman, raised his eyebrows slightly, but stepped aside without comment, watching as she grabbed a premium blend and continued her mission. From his vantage point, Morgan observed the tension radiating from this woman, the way other shoppers instinctively moved out of her path. There was something fascinating about her determined isolation, so at odds with the community feel of the store. He placed his selected bottle of Cabernet in his basket and continued shopping. His writer's curiosity piqued. Meanwhile, Jordan was hitting his stride. He had just finished helping a mother with 3 young children, patiently waiting as they counted out coins to pay for their ice cream. Sandra had noticed his improved confidence and left him unsupervised, moving to help at another register, where a new trainee was struggling. As Rachel approached the checkout area, her eyes darted between the lines, calculating which would move fastest. She spotted Jordan's line, only 2 customers deep compared to the others with 4 or 5. Perfect. She didn't notice Jordan's Down syndrome as she stepped into line. Her attention was divided between her buzzing phone and her mental checklist of remaining tasks. The customer ahead of her finished, and Rachel stepped forward, placing her basket on the counter with more force than necessary. "Good morning," Jordan greeted cheerfully. "Did you find everything okay today?" Rachel glanced up briefly, her expression shifting subtly as she registered Jordan's features. A flicker of impatience crossed her face. "Yes, fine," she replied curtly, returning her attention to her phone. "I'm in a bit of a hurry." Jordan nodded, maintaining his smile as he began scanning her items. "I'll be as quick as I can, ma'am." His movements were methodical and careful, not slow by average standards, but not as rapid as Rachel had hoped. She glanced at her watch, then at the other lines, wondering if she had made a tactical error in her choice. "Could you please scan a little faster?" she asked, her tone clipped. Jordan looked up, his smile faltering slightly. "I'm doing my best, ma'am." From 2 aisles over, Morgan Freeman had moved closer to the registers, ostensibly examining a display of local honey. His attention, however, was fixed on the interaction unfolding at Jordan's checkout. Rachel's impatience grew as Jordan carefully placed each item in bags, organizing them by category as Sandra had taught him. When he paused to look up a produce, "Code for organic apples," Rachel sighed audibly. "Is there a problem with the system?" she asked, her frustration barely concealed. "No, ma'am," Jordan replied, his voice quieter now. "I just needed to find the right code." As Jordan continued scanning, His hands began to tremble slightly. The confidence he had built over the past day and a half began to crack under Rachel's intense stare. He fumbled with a carton of eggs, nearly dropping them before carefully placing them in a separate bag. "Careful with those," Rachel snapped. "They're for a souffle tonight." Jordan nodded, not trusting his voice. In his mind he heard echoes of past mockery, classmates laughing at his slowness, the cruel nicknames they had given him. He took a deep breath, trying to focus on his mother's encouragement instead. Morgan. Freeman had abandoned any pretense of shopping now. He stood near the end of the aisle, watching the situation with growing concern. There was something about the young cashier's dignity in the face of rudeness that struck him deeply. As Jordan finished scanning the last item, he looked up with a renewed attempt at friendliness. "Your total is $87.43, ma'am." Rachel thrust her credit card forward without making eye contact. Jordan processed the payment, his movements still careful despite his growing anxiety. "Would you like your receipt in the bag or with you?" he asked, following store protocol. "In the bag is fine," Rachel replied, checking her watch again. "I really need to get going." Jordan handed her the bags, making sure the eggs were on top. "Have a nice day, ma'am. Thank you for shopping at Lakeside." Rachel took the bags with a curt nod and turned to leave, but froze when she saw the line that had formed behind her. 6 customers stood waiting, including an older man in a baseball cap who was watching her with an unreadable expression. "Sorry for the wait," she heard Jordan say to the next customer, his voice still cheerful despite the tension of their interaction. Something about his resilience irritated Rachel even further. As she adjusted her grip on the bags, one slipped slightly, causing the contents to shift. It was a minor inconvenience, but in Rachel's precisely ordered day, it was the final straw. She turned back toward Jordan, unaware that her next words would set in motion events that would change multiple lives forever. "Excuse me," Rachel's voice cut sharply through the air as she placed her bags down on the edge of the checkout counter. "I think there's a problem here." Jordan looked up, his smile wavering slightly. "Is something wrong with your items, ma'am?" Rachel's lips thinned as she pulled out a jar of organic pasta sauce. "You charged me $6.99 for this when the sign said $5.49. I want the difference refunded." In truth, Rachel wasn't particularly concerned about the $1.50. What bothered her was the principle, the inefficiency, the mistake, and more significantly, the further delay to her schedule. Jordan hesitated, trying to remember the price verification procedure Sandra had taught him. "I can call for a price check, ma'am," he offered, reaching for the store phone. "A price check," Rachel repeated, incredulity seeping into her voice. "Can't you just take my word for it and give me the refund? It's $1.50, for heavens." "Sarka." The customers in line shifted uncomfortably. An older woman with a cart full of groceries glanced at her watch, while a young man in gym clothes scrolled through his phone, pretending not to notice the brewing tension. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I need to follow store policy," Jordan explained, his voice soft but steady. He dialed the number for assistance and announced over the intercom, "Price check on register 7, please." Rachel's nostrils flared. "This is ridiculous. I have a lunch meeting in 20 minutes. As Jordan waited for a response to his page, his mind drifted back to 7th grade. He was sitting in the cafeteria, carefully opening his lunchbox when Tyler Jenkins, the popular kid from his math class, slid onto the bench across from him. "Hey, Jordan," Tyler said with an unsettling smile. "Want to see a magic trick?" Jordan had nodded eagerly, always happy when classmates engaged with him instead of ignoring him. Tyler took Jordan's chocolate pudding cup and pretended to examine it closely. "Watch carefully," Tyler instructed, making elaborate gestures with his hands before quickly slipping the pudding cup into his backpack. "Abracadabra! It's gone!" As Tyler and his friends erupted in laughter, Jordan had sat there, confused and hurt, not understanding why they found his loss amusing. It wasn't until his mother explained it that evening that he realized he'd been deliberately tricked. "Some people feel bigger when they make others feel smaller," she had told him, her eyes sad but her voice firm. "But that says more about them than it does about you." Jordan's memory dissolved as Miguel arrived at the register. "What's the price check for?" Miguel asked, looking between Jordan and the increasingly impatient Rachel. "The organic pasta sauce," Jordan replied. The customer says it's $5.49, but it rang up as $6.99. Miguel nodded. I'll check and be right back. As Miguel jogged toward the pasta aisle, Rachel let out an exaggerated sigh. This is taking forever, she complained, loud enough for nearby customers to hear. I should have chosen another line. From his position near the magazine rack, Morgan Freeman observed the interaction with growing interest. He had seen similar scenes play out countless times in his life. The impatient customer, the diligent employee caught in the middle. But there was something especially poignant about this young man's quiet dignity in the face of mounting pressure. Miguel returned quickly. You're right, ma'am, he confirmed. The sign does say 5.49s. It's on sale this week, but I guess the system hasn't been updated. Rachel's expression tightened further. So I've been standing here all this time just to confirm what I already told you. Jordan began the refund process, his movements careful as he navigated the register's touchscreen. I'm processing your refund now, ma'am. I apologize for the inconvenience. You should be apologizing to everyone in this line, Rachel replied sharply. We're all being held up because of this. A murmur ran through the waiting customers. Some looked down uncomfortably, while others exchanged glances of disapproval, though it wasn't clear whether their disapproval was directed at Rachel or at the delay itself. Jordan's hands began to tremble slightly as he printed the refund receipt. The confident rhythm he had established earlier that morning was now completely disrupted. He handed Rachel the small slip of paper and $1.50 in cash. Thank you for your patience, ma'am, he said, the words coming out mechanically as he had been trained. Rachel took the money and stuffed it into her purse without acknowledging his apology. As she gathered her bags once more, one of them slipped from her grasp. The jar of pasta sauce crashed to the floor, shattering instantly and splashing red sauce across the white tile. The sound of breaking glass silenced the checkout area. Jordan froze, his eyes wide with alarm. Oh, for crying out loud, Rachel exclaimed, jumping back to avoid the splatter. Is nothing going to go right today? Jordan immediately reached for the intercom. Clean up on register 7, please, he announced, his voice shaking slightly. He turned to Rachel. I'm very sorry about that, ma'am. We'll get this cleaned up right away. Rachel's face flushed with anger. Sorry doesn't fix my ruined shoes, she snapped, gesturing to the red droplets on her beige heels. Or the fact that I now have to go back and get another jar, which I definitely don't have time for. Jordan stepped out from behind the register. I can get you another jar, ma'am, he offered, eager to make things right. No, Rachel replied, her voice rising. I think you've done enough. She waved a dismissive hand. Just get someone else to finish ringing up these people. Someone who can actually do the job properly. The words hit Jordan like a physical blow. He felt heat rising in his cheeks as memories of his stepfather's cruel dismissals echoed in his mind. You'll never be able to hold down a real job. They'll see you're different and show you the door. Sandra arrived at the scene, assessing the situation quickly. Is everything okay here? She asked, her tone professional, but with an edge of concern as she noticed Jordan's distress. No, everything is not okay, Rachel replied before Jordan could speak. I've been delayed by a price check that shouldn't have been necessary, my groceries were mishandled, and now I'm standing in pasta sauce. Sandra nodded calmly. I understand you're frustrated. Let me get this cleaned up right away. She gestured to another employee who had arrived with cleaning supplies. Jordan, why don't you continue helping this customer while we take care of the spill? Jordan nodded, grateful for Sandra's intervention, but still rattled by Rachel's comments. He returned to his register, trying to focus on the next customer, an elderly man who smiled at him kindly. Don't worry about it, son, the man said quietly. Some people just wake up on the wrong side of the bed. As Jordan scanned the man's few items, he could still hear Rachel complaining to Sandra, her voice carrying clearly across the checkout. Teria, I don't understand why you would put someone so limited on a register during peak hours, she was saying, making little effort to lower her voice. It's unfair to your customers who are in a hurry. More heads turned now, the discomfort in the store palpable. Morgan Freeman set down the magazine he had been pretending to read and moved closer, his expression darkening as he listened to Rachel's continued commentary. The confrontation was no longer just beginning. It was building toward a crescendo. That would soon demand resolution. The pasta sauce pooled on the floor like a small Red Sea, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. As the cleanup crew worked to contain the spill, Rachel stood with her arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently on the dry section of tile. Her schedule was now officially derailed, and someone was going to hear about it. "I'll need to speak with the store manager," she announced, her voice carrying across the checkout area. "The real manager," she added, with a pointed look at Sandra, who was supervising the cleanup. "I am the store manager," Sandra replied evenly, meeting Rachel's gaze. "And I apologize for the inconvenience, but accidents happen." "Accidents," Rachel echoed, raising an eyebrow. "This was clearly negligence. I'm sure you have insurance for this sort of thing. My shoes are ruined." Sandra maintained her professional demeanor. "We'd be happy to provide you with a gift card for your trouble. Jordan, could you please continue helping the customers in line while I assist this lady?" Jordan nodded gratefully and turned back to his register. His hands were still trembling slightly, but he forced himself to focus on the elderly customer in front of him. "Thank you for your patience, sir," he said, scanning a carton of milk. "Don't you worry about it, young man," the elderly gentleman replied kindly. "I've got nowhere to be." From behind them, Rachel's voice rose again. "A $20 gift card? That hardly covers the cost of these shoes, let alone my wasted time." Morgan Freeman, still observing from nearby, shook his head slightly. He had seen this scenario play out countless times in his long life, people using minor inconveniences as an excuse to vent their frustrations on those they perceived as easy targets. He shifted his position, moving closer to Jordan's register, as E. Jordan finished with the elderly man. Rachel's voice cut through the air once more. "And frankly, I think you should reconsider your hiring practices. Not everyone is suited for customer-facing roles." The store fell suddenly quiet, the background music seeming to fade as customers and employees alike registered the implication of her words. Jordan froze, a loaf of bread suspended halfway to the bag. Sandra's expression hardened. "Ma'am, I think we're done here. Please take the gift card and have a nice day." But Rachel wasn't finished. Sensing she'd found a nerve, she pressed further. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking," she said, gesturing toward the line. "We're all being held up because you wanted to feel good about hiring the handicapped kid." Several gasps echoed through the checkout area. An older woman covered her mouth in shock, while a young mother pulled her curious child closer to her side. Jordan's vision blurred slightly as tears threatened to form. He blinked them back fiercely, determined not to cry in front of everyone. The bread still hung in his hand, forgotten, as his mind tumbled back through years of similar moments. The birthday party invitations that never came, the group projects where no one wanted him on their team, the school dance where he'd stood alone against the wall for 2 hours before his mother came to pick him up early. "I'm not handicapped," he said quietly, the words barely audible. "What was that?" Rachel asked, taking a step closer to his register. Jordan swallowed hard and looked up, meeting her gaze directly for the first time. "I said, I'm not handicapped. I have Down syndrome, and I can do this job." His voice shook but held firm, surprising even himself with its clarity. For a brief moment he felt a surge of pride. His mother would be proud of him for standing up for himself. Rachel's expression shifted from irritation to something closer to pity, which somehow felt worse. "Look," she said, her tone condescending, "I'm sure you're trying your best, but some jobs just require a certain speed and capability that not everyone has. There's no shame in that." But there was shame. Jordan felt it burning in his cheeks, tightening his throat. The bread in his hand was now slightly crushed from his unconscious grip. "I passed all my training," he managed to say, "and yesterday I did good." "Well," Rachel corrected automatically. "You did well, not good. And clearly, not well enough." A murmur of disapproval rippled through the onlookers. The young mother who had pulled her child close now stepped forward slightly. "That's enough," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "He's doing his job just fine." Rachel turned, seeming almost surprised that someone had challenged her. "I have a right to express my concerns about the service I'm receiving," she replied coolly. And my concern is that this store is prioritizing some misguided sense of charity over customer satisfaction. The words charity landed like a slap. Jordan's hand dropped, the bread falling into the bag with a soft thud. In his mind, he was suddenly 10 years old again, sitting on the bench outside the principal's office, overhearing his mother arguing with the school administrator. "My son is not a charity case," his mother had insisted, her voice tight with controlled anger. "He's a student with rights, just like every other child in this school." The administrator's placating tone still echoed in his memory. "Mrs. Adams, we're doing our best to accommodate Jordan, but you have to understand our resources are limited." The memory dissolved as Sandra stepped between Rachel and Jordan's register. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave now. We don't tolerate that kind of talk in our store." Rachel's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're asking me to leave? I'm the customer here. I'm the one who's been inconvenienced." "Yes, and we've offered compensation for that inconvenience," Sandra replied firmly. "But that doesn't give you the right to speak to my employees that way." "Fine," Rachel scoffed, gathering her remaining bags. "I'll be taking my business elsewhere from now on, and I'll be sure to let everyone know why." As she turned to leave, she paused and added, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Maybe next time hire someone who can actually do the job, rather than trying to fill some diversity quota." The cruelty of the words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jordan stood completely still, the scanner in his hand forgotten as he stared at the counter, unable to look up and face the pitying stares he was certain surrounded him. A heavy silence filled the checkout area, broken only by the soft background music and the continued beeping of other registers. Sandra placed a gentle hand on Jordan's shoulder, but before she could speak, a deep, authoritative voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me, ma'am, but I believe you dropped something." All eyes turned to the source of the voice, Morgan Freeman, standing tall near the end of Jordan's checkout lane, holding what appeared to be a receipt. Rachel paused, frowning slightly, thrown off by the interruption to her dramatic exit. "What?" Morgan stepped forward, the small piece of paper extended in his hand. "You dropped this, along with your humanity and basic decency, it seems." The store fell completely silent, as customers and employees alike recognized the distinctive voice and presence of the legendary actor. Rachel's expression shifted from confusion to shock as she realized who was addressing her. The confrontation had just taken an unexpected turn. "That's enough." Morgan Freeman's voice carried through the store, with a quiet power that commanded attention. It wasn't loud, but it possessed a depth and authority that made everyone freeze in place, including Rachel, who stood with her mouth slightly open, recognition dawning in her eyes. The actor removed his baseball cap, revealing his full face. To the now silent onlookers, a collective murmur of surprise rippled through the store as people began to realize who had been shopping among them. Phones appeared in hands, though no one dared to approach or interrupt what was clearly a significant moment unfolding before them. "I've been watching this situation develop," Morgan continued, his gaze fixed steadily on Rachel, "and I've reached the limit of what I can witness without speaking up." Rachel shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that she was no longer the most commanding presence in the room. The bags in her hands seemed heavier now, as she struggled to find her footing in this unexpected turn of events. "With all due respect, Mr. Freeman," she began, her voice lacking its previous edge, "this doesn't concern you." "I disagree," Morgan replied, stepping closer. "When one human being chooses to tear down another for simply existing in a way that inconveniences them slightly, it concerns all of us." He gestured toward Jordan, who stood frozen behind his register, watching the exchange with wide eyes. "This young man has shown nothing but patience and professionalism in the face of your increasingly hostile behavior." Rachel's cheeks flushed. "You don't understand. I understand perfectly," Morgan interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "You're having a difficult day. You're running late. Things aren't going according to your plan. I get it. We've all been there." He paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. "But that doesn't give any of us the right to diminish another person's humanity." The store remained silent, every person present absorbed in the moment. Jordan's hands had stopped trembling as he watched Morgan speak, a strange calm replacing his earlier anxiety. Morgan turned away from Rachel and approached the checkout counter. "May I ask your name, young man?" he asked, his eyes kind as they met Jordan's. "Jordan," came the quiet reply. "Jordan Adams." Morgan nodded, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Jordan Adams," he repeated, as if committing the name to memory. "It's an honor to meet you." Jordan blinked in surprise. "An honor to meet me?" "Absolutely," Morgan confirmed. "I've been watching you work today and I've seen something remarkable. Dignity under pressure. That's not something everyone possesses." He turned slightly, addressing not just Jordan, but everyone within earshot. "You see, true character isn't revealed when everything's going smoothly. It's revealed in moments of challenge and difficulty." Rachel stood awkwardly to the side, her exit now blocked by several customers who had gathered to witness the exchange. Her earlier righteousness had evaporated, replaced by the uncomfortable realization that she had become the villain in a story that would likely be retold throughout the community. Morgan continued, his focus returning to Jordan. "You've shown more patience and professionalism in the past 30 minutes than many people demonstrate in their entire careers." He placed a hand gently on the counter, leaning in slightly. "We all face difficult moments, Jordan. We all encounter people who try to define us by what they perceive as our limitations. But those moments don't define who we are. How we respond to them does." Jordan nodded slowly, absorbing the words. "My mom says something like that," Morgan smiled. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She is," Jordan agreed, his voice growing slightly stronger. "She always tells me that I can do anything I set my mind to. It just might take me a different path to get there." "Different paths," Morgan echoed, nodding thoughtfully. "That's exactly right. And those different paths enrich all of our journeys, if only we have the wisdom to see it." He straightened up and turned to face the gathered crowd, his expression serious once more. "We're all guilty of impatience sometimes. We all get frustrated when things don't move at the pace we'd prefer, but there's a choice in how we express that frustration." His gaze swept over the onlookers, making brief eye contact with several people before continuing. "When we choose cruelty, we diminish not just the person we target but ourselves. When we choose kindness, especially when it's difficult, we elevate everyone around us." Rachel shifted her weight from one foot to the other, clearly uncomfortable, being the implied subject of this impromptu lecture. "I should go," she murmured, attempting to edge toward the exit. "Before you do," Morgan said, turning back to her, "I think there's something that needs to be said." Rachel froze, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and apprehension. The store held its collective breath, waiting for what might come next, perhaps a public dressing down from one of America's most respected figures. But Morgan's next words surprised everyone. "Jordan," he said gently, "would you be willing to continue checking out this customer's items? I believe she still needs to purchase that replacement jar of pasta sauce." Jordan looked startled, then confused, and finally determined. He nodded once. "Yes, sir, I can do that." Morgan smiled. "I know you can." Then, addressing Rachel directly, he added, "And perhaps this time we can all approach the transaction with a bit more patience and understanding. What do you say?" Rachel stood speechless for a moment, caught in a situation she couldn't control or dominate. The dozens of eyes watching her left little room for refusal. Slowly she nodded. "I'll get another jar," she said quietly, turning toward the pasta aisle. As she walked away, Morgan returned his attention to Jordan. "Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply continue doing our job with dignity, even when others don't recognize our value." Jordan straightened his shoulders slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Freeman." Morgan shook his head. "No, thank you, Jordan, for reminding all of us what true professionalism looks like." He stepped back from the counter, allowing space for the next customer to approach. The elderly gentleman who had been waiting patiently throughout the entire scene stepped forward with a smile. "That was something, wasn't it?" he remarked to Jordan. Jordan nodded, a small smile beginning to form on his lips. "Yes, sir, it was." As Rachel returned with a new jar of pasta sauce, the store began to buzz with whispered conversations. Phones captured discreet photos and videos, while customers texted friends and family about the celebrity encounter and the unexpected moral lesson they had witnessed. Morgan remained nearby, browsing a display of local honey, but keeping a watchful eye on the interaction. Rachel approached Jordan's register with a noticeably different demeanor, her earlier aggression replaced with subdued embarrassment. "I found the sauce," she said, placing it gently on the counter. Jordan nodded, scanning the item carefully. "Would you like this in a separate bag?" "Yes, please," Rachel replied, her voice softer than before. After a pause, she added, "And I'm sorry about before. I was having a bad day, but that's no excuse." Jordan looked up, surprised by the apology. For a moment, he said nothing, processing the unexpected turn of events. Then, with simple sincerity, he responded, "Thank you for saying that. I hope your day gets better." As Rachel paid and gathered her bags, the transformation in the store's atmosphere was palpable. What had begun as a scene of cruelty and discrimination had somehow evolved into something unexpected, a moment of recognition, apology, and perhaps even growth. And Morgan Freeman, watching from a respectful distance, knew that the real story was just beginning. As Rachel gathered her bags and made her way toward the exit, the atmosphere in Lakeside Grocery shifted like the turning of a tide. The tension that had filled the air minutes before began to dissolve, replaced by something warmer, something that felt almost like community. Jordan took a deep breath, his hands now steady, as he greeted the next customer in line, the elderly gentleman who had been waiting patiently throughout the confrontation. "Thank you for your patience, sir," Jordan said, his voice stronger than before. "Not at all, young man," the gentleman replied, placing his items on the counter. "That was quite something to witness. You handled yourself with real dignity." Jordan's cheeks flushed slightly at the compliment as he scanned the man's groceries. From nearby, Morgan Freeman observed the interaction, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Other customers began to approach Jordan's line specifically, some offering words of encouragement as they placed their items on the counter. "My nephew has Down syndrome," a woman in her 50s told him as he bagged her groceries. "He's in college now studying art. People like you paved the way for him." "My son is different too," another customer shared. "It means a lot to see someone like you working here, showing what's possible." Each interaction seemed to strengthen Jordan, adding a brick to the foundation of confidence that had been temporarily shaken by Rachel's cruelty. His movements became more assured, his smile more genuine, as he continued his work with renewed purpose. Sandra, who had been managing other registers during Morgan's intervention, approached the actor with an extended hand. "Mr. Freeman, I can't thank you enough for what you just did. I was trying to handle the situation, but—" Morgan shook her hand warmly. "You were doing fine," he assured her. "Sometimes an outside voice just carries a different kind of weight." Sandra nodded gratefully. "Well, your voice certainly carried the perfect weight today. Jordan's one of our best new hires. He's so meticulous and genuinely cares about getting things right." "It broke my heart to see him treated that way. The true measure of a society is how it treats its most vulnerable members," Morgan replied. "But I'd suggest that Jordan isn't as vulnerable as he might appear. There's a strength in him that many people lack." As they spoke, the store's atmosphere continued to transform. Customers who had witnessed the confrontation were sharing the story with newcomers. Phones were discreetly capturing photos of Morgan, and a palpable sense of having been part of something meaningful pervaded the space. Meanwhile, Jordan continued working, processing each transaction with care. The line at his register had grown longer, not because he was slow, but because customers were deliberately choosing to wait for him. A complete reversal from the situation earlier. A young mother with a small child approached, placing a few items on the counter. "My daughter has a question for you," she said gently to Jordan. The little girl, no more than 6 years old, looked up at Jordan with curious eyes. "Why was that lady being mean to you?" she asked innocently. Jordan paused, considering how to answer. The store seemed to quiet again, customers listening for his response. "Sometimes," he began slowly, "people get frustrated when things don't go the way they expect, and sometimes they don't understand that everyone is different, and different isn't bad. The little girl nodded solemnly. My teacher says the same thing. She says being different is what makes the world interesting. Jordan smiled. Your teacher is very smart. As the mother and daughter gathered their bags, the woman placed a hand briefly on Jordan's. Thank you for that perfect explanation. You've given us something important to talk about on the way home. By now, Morgan had moved back to Jordan's register, placing his own items on the counter, the bottle of wine, some cheese, and the jar of local honey he had been examining. Found everything okay today, sir? Jordan asked, falling naturally into his customer service role despite the extraordinary circumstances. Morgan chuckled warmly. I certainly did. And I found something I wasn't expecting, too, a reminder of the power of dignity. As Jordan scanned the items, Morgan continued. You know, in my many years, I've learned that moments like what happened today, they're crossroads. Crossroads? Jordan asked, carefully placing the wine bottle in a bag. Yes, Morgan nodded. Moments where we have to choose which path to take. The easy path is to let cruelty diminish us, to believe what others say about our limitations. The harder path is to stand firm in our own worth. Jordan considered this as he processed Morgan's payment. I almost took the easy path today, he admitted quietly. When she was saying those things, I wanted to hide. But you didn't, Morgan pointed out. You stayed right here, doing your job. That's the definition of courage, not the absence of fear, but the determination to continue despite it. As Morgan gathered his purchases, he added, And now look what's happened. You've become an inspiration to everyone in this store today. Jordan glanced around, noticing for the first time how many people were watching him with admiration, rather, than pity or impatience. The realization was overwhelming. Where once he had felt ashamed of being noticed, now he felt oddly proud. I don't know what to say, Jordan told Morgan, his voice thick with emotion. Morgan smiled. You don't need to say anything, just keep being exactly who you are. That's more than enough. As Morgan turned to leave, Sandra approached again. Mr. Freeman, would you mind if I took a photo of you with Jordan? Just for our store, not for social media or anything. This is a pretty special moment for us. Morgan looked to Jordan. Would that be okay with you? Jordan nodded, a grin spreading across his face. Yes, sir. I'd like that very much. Sandra snapped a photo of the two of them, Jordan beaming with newfound confidence beside the legendary actor. As Morgan prepared to leave, he shook Jordan's hand firmly. Jordan Adams, he said, his deep voice resonating with sincerity. It was truly an honor to meet you today. Thank you, Mr. Freeman, Jordan replied. For everything. As Morgan walked toward the exit, customers parted respectfully, some nodding in appreciation, others whispering thanks for his intervention. He acknowledged them with modest nods, deflecting the attention back toward Jordan. Just before reaching the doors, Morgan turned back for one final look at the young man who had faced such cruelty with dignity. Jordan was already helping his next customer, his posture straighter, his movements more confident than before. The tide had turned. What had begun as an ordinary day, then descended into cruelty, had somehow transformed into something extraordinary. A moment of collective humanity where the best in people had overcome the worst. As Morgan stepped out into the afternoon sunlight, he knew that while his intervention might soon be forgotten, the impact on Jordan, and perhaps on everyone who had witnessed today's events, would last far longer than any fleeting moment of fame or viral video. Real change, after all, happened, not in dramatic confrontations, but in the quiet shifts of perception that followed, in the minds of the customers who would now see Jordan differently, in Rachel's potential reflection on her behavior, and most importantly, in Jordan's strengthened belief in his own worth. The tide had turned for Jordan Adams, and sometimes when the tide turns, it never flows quite the same way again. The afternoon. Sun was beginning to cast long shadows by the time Jordan's shift ended. The events of the day seemed to have transformed the grocery store into something different, a place where strangers spoke to each other more freely, where smiles were exchanged more readily, and where a sense of shared experience lingered in the air. In the employee break room, Jordan sat quietly on a bench staring at his locker. The blue metal door reflected the fluorescent light above, and for a moment he simply breathed, processing everything that had happened. Sandra entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Jordan and took a seat beside him. "How are you doing?" she asked gently. "That was quite a day." Jordan accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. "I'm okay," he said, then after a pause, added more truthfully, "I think I'm okay. It all feels a little unreal." Sandra smiled. Meeting Morgan Freeman would make anyone's day feel unreal. "Not just that," Jordan clarified, wrapping his hands around the warm cup. "Everything. The way people were so mean and then so nice. The way everyone wanted to talk to me after. It's like I was invisible and then I wasn't, and then I was famous, all in one day." Sandra considered his words. "You know, Jordan, you were never invisible to those of us who matter. We saw your potential from the beginning." Jordan stared into his coffee. "But what about tomorrow? Will people go back to normal? Will they look at me different now?" It was the question that had been nagging at him through the last hours of his shift. Was this change permanent, or simply a reaction to a celebrity's involvement? Sandra placed a hand on his shoulder. "Some things don't go back to how they were before, Jordan. Some experiences change us. I think today changed this store, and it certainly changed you." Before Jordan could respond, there was a knock at the break room door. Miguel poked his head in, his expression a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "Jordan, you need to see this," he said, holding up his phone. "You're all over social media, man." Jordan's eyes widened. "What? Why?" Miguel entered the room fully, now scrolling through his phone. "Someone posted a video of Morgan Freeman standing up for you. It's got like 50,000 views already, and it's only been a couple hours." He handed the phone to Jordan, who watched with growing astonishment as the scene played out from a customer's perspective. Rachel's cruel words, Morgan's dignified intervention, the transformation that followed. The video had been captioned, "Morgan Freeman defends grocery worker with Down syndrome from abusive customer. This is how we should treat each other. People are sharing it everywhere," Miguel continued enthusiastically. "There are hashtags and everything. Be kind like Freeman and stand with Jordan are trending locally." Jordan handed the phone back, feeling slightly overwhelmed. "I don't understand. Why do people care so much?" Sandra smiled gently. "Because it's a story that reminds us of our better selves, Jordan. In a world where people so often look away from cruelty, Mr. Freeman chose to step in. That matters to people." Jordan nodded slowly, trying to process the idea that strangers across town, perhaps across the country, were watching his most vulnerable moment. Yet strangely, it didn't feel violating. The video didn't show his humiliation, it showed his vindication. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from his mother. "Honey, are you okay? I'm getting calls from people who saw a video of you and Morgan Freeman at the store." "What happened?" Jordan smiled, texting back, "I'm fine, Mom. It's a long story. I'll tell you when I get home." As Jordan gathered his things to leave, Sandra handed him a small envelope. "Before you go, I wanted to give you this." Jordan opened it to find the photo she had taken of him with Morgan Freeman, already printed out. In the image, Jordan was standing tall, his smile bright and genuine, while Morgan's hand rested supportively on his shoulder. "I thought you might want a copy," Sandra explained. "Not every day you get to meet a legend." Jordan carefully tucked the photo into his wallet. "Thank you, Sandra, for this and for believing in me." "That part's easy," she replied with a warm smile. "See you tomorrow?" Jordan nodded, a new determination in his eyes. "Definitely. I'll be here." As he walked through the store toward the exit, several employees and even a few lingering customers nodded or smiled in recognition. It was a stark contrast to the morning, when he had moved through the same space virtually unnoticed. Outside, the evening air felt fresh against his face. Jordan took a deep breath, feeling somehow both exhausted and energized by the day's events. As he started walking toward the bus stop, a sleek black car pulled up alongside him, and the passenger window rolled down. "Need a ride home, Jordan?" Morgan Freeman's unmistakable voice asked from within. Jordan stopped, surprised to see the actor still at the store. "Mr. Freeman, I thought you left hours ago," Morgan smiled. "I had some other errands to run, but I wanted to check in on you before I headed back to my hotel. Climb in." Jordan hesitated only briefly before opening the door and sliding into the passenger seat. The car's interior was luxurious but understated, much like the man himself. "How? Are you holding up?" Morgan asked as he pulled away from the curb. "I'm okay," Jordan replied, then added with growing confidence, "Actually, I'm better than okay. I feel different." Morgan nodded as if this made perfect sense. Challenges either diminish us or reveal our true strength. Today you discovered something about yourself that perhaps you didn't know before. "That I'm stronger than I thought," Jordan said quietly, precisely. Morgan navigated a turn, then asked, "Which way to your house?" As Jordan gave directions, the conversation flowed naturally between them, Morgan asking about Jordan's interests, his family, his dreams for the future. There was no condescension in his questions, only genuine curiosity and respect. "My mom always told me I could do anything I set my mind to," Jordan shared. "But sometimes it's hard to believe that when the world keeps telling you otherwise." Morgan nodded thoughtfully. "The world is often wrong about what people are capable of. I've seen that truth play out countless times throughout my life." They drove in comfortable silence for a moment before Morgan continued. "You know, they're likely going to ask me about what happened today. The press has a way of finding these stories." Jordan glanced over, suddenly anxious. "What will you tell them?" Morgan considered the question carefully. "I could tell them I witnessed an act of cruelty and decided to intervene, but I think I'll tell them the truth, that I witnessed an act of extraordinary dignity from a young man who refused to be diminished by someone else's judgment. That's the real story here." As they turned onto Jordan Street, Morgan added, "Your mother was right, Jordan. You can do anything you set your mind to. Today proved that." The car pulled up in front of a modest two-story house where the porch light was already on. Jordan could see his mother's silhouette through the front window, probably watching anxiously for his arrival. "Thank you for the ride, Mr. Freeman," Jordan said, reaching for the door handle. "And for everything else." Morgan smiled. "Call me Morgan. And perhaps this isn't the end of our conversation, just a pause. I have a feeling your story is just beginning, Jordan Adams." As Jordan stepped out of the car, he turned back once more. "Do you really think people will care about what happened today, tomorrow, or next week?" Morgan's expression grew serious. "Some will forget, certainly, but others will remember. And more importantly, you'll remember. The knowledge that you faced cruelty with dignity can never be taken from you. Carry that forward and you'll be unstoppable." With those words still resonating in his mind, Jordan walked up the path to his house, where his mother had already opened the door, her expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "Jordan," she began, "what in the world is going on?" "Mrs. Hernandez called and said you're on a video with Morgan Freeman, and then I see you getting out of a fancy car and—" Jordan smiled, feeling a newfound confidence flowing through him. "Mom," he said, taking her hand, "you're not going to believe what happened today." Behind him, the black car pulled away silently, carrying away the man who had changed everything. Yet somehow, Jordan knew, the real change had come from within himself. And that was just the beginning. Jordan awoke the next morning to the persistent buzzing of his phone. Blinking away sleep, he reached for the device and was immediately confronted with a flood of notifications. Text messages, social media alerts, and missed calls, all arriving at a pace his phone had never experienced before. "What in the world?" he muttered, sitting up in bed. The previous night had been a whirlwind. After telling his mother everything that had happened, they'd watched the viral video together. Sarah had alternated between tears of anger at Rachel's cruelty and tears of pride at her son's dignity. When he'd told her about Morgan Freeman's ride home, she'd initially thought he was joking until he showed her the photo Sandra had printed. Now, as he scrolled through his phone, Jordan realized that overnight the story had exploded beyond their small town. The original video had jumped from 50,000 to over 3 million views. News outlets had picked it up. Celebrities were resharing it, and the hashtags "A Stand with Jordan" and "Morgan Freeman Hero" were trending nationally. "Jordan, come down here." his mother called from downstairs, her voice carrying a note of urgency that propelled him out of bed. Downstairs, Sarah sat on the couch, coffee mug in hand, staring at the television. On screen, a morning news program was showing the now familiar footage with a banner headline, "Morgan Freeman stands up for worker with Down syndrome." The video, which has now been viewed over 3 million times, shows the Oscar-winning actor intervening when a customer began berating Jordan Adams, a 22-year-old employee with Down syndrome, the anchor was saying. Freeman's calm but powerful response has resonated with viewers across the country. Jordan sat beside his mother, watching in stunned silence as commentators dissected the incident, praising Morgan's intervention and condemning Rachel's behavior. "They're talking about me," he said quietly. "On national TV." Sarah squeezed his hand. "They're talking about what happened to you, but they're also talking about how you handled it. With dignity." Jordan's phone buzzed again, a text from Sandra. "Are you watching the news? The store's phone has been ringing non-stop. People wanting to speak to you, journalists wanting interviews. What do you want me to tell them?" Before Jordan could even formulate a response, there was a knock at the front door. Sarah rose to answer it, returning moments later with a stunned expression. "There are reporters outside," she said disbelievingly. 3 news vans parked on our street." Jordan peeked through the curtains. Sure enough, several camera crews had set up on the sidewalk, and a small crowd of neighbors had gathered to watch. "The commotion. What do we do?" he asked, suddenly feeling anxious. His job at the grocery store had been a big step toward independence, but this was something entirely different. Sarah took a deep breath, gathering herself. "We don't have to do anything if you don't want to. We can close the curtains and wait for them to leave." Jordan considered this for a moment, then shook his head. "No, I think maybe I should talk to them. Morgan wasn't afraid to speak up yesterday. Maybe I shouldn't be afraid either." Pride shone in Sarah's eyes. "Are you sure, honey? You don't owe anyone your story." "I know," Jordan replied. "But maybe my story could help someone else, someone like me." As Jordan showered and dressed, selecting his nicest button-up shirt, his phone continued its relentless buzzing. A text from Miguel informed him that Lakeside Grocery was packed with customers who had come specifically to shop at Jordan's register, a line that now stretched down the aisles. Another notification showed that the Down Syndrome Association of America had shared the video with a powerful message. "This is why representation matters. This is why inclusion matters." Jordan's dignity in the face of discrimination reminds us all of the work still to be done, and the incredible contributions people with Down syndrome make to our communities every day. When Jordan finally stepped outside to face the reporters, he was surprised by his own calmness. The nervous trembling that had overtaken him during Rachel's tirade was nowhere to be found. "Jordan, can you tell us about your experience yesterday? How did it feel when Morgan Freeman stepped in? What would you say to the woman who berated you?" The questions came rapid fire, microphones thrust toward him as cameras rolled. Jordan took a deep breath, channeling the quiet dignity he had witnessed in Morgan. "Yesterday started as just a normal day at work," he began, his voice steady. "I was excited because it was only my second day, and I wanted to do a good job." As he recounted the events, Rachel's impatience, her escalating cruelty, Morgan's intervention, and the transformation that followed, the reporters fell into a respectful silence, allowing him to tell the story at his own pace. "The most important thing I learned," Jordan concluded, "is that we all have a choice in how we treat people who are different from us, and that choice says more about who we are than it does about the person we are judging." The wisdom of his words, echoing Morgan's sentiments from the day before, seemed to surprise the reporters, who exchanged glances of admiration. "What would you say to other people with Down syndrome who face discrimination?" One journalist asked. Jordan thought for a moment. "I would say, you're not defined by how others see you. You're defined by how you see yourself, and you have value no matter what anyone says." As the impromptu press conference continued, Jordan's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. Excusing himself momentarily, he answered. "Hello, Jordan Adams speaking." "Jordan, it's Morgan Freeman." The unmistakable voice brought an immediate smile to Jordan's face. I see you've become quite the celebrity overnight. Jordan laughed softly. Not by choice, there are news vans outside my house. That doesn't surprise me, Morgan replied. Your story has touched a lot of people, but I wanted to check in and make sure you're doing all right with all this attention. I think so, Jordan said thoughtfully. It's strange, but it also feels like maybe this happened for a reason. I believe it did, Morgan agreed. Sometimes the universe has a way of putting us exactly where we need to be, even if it doesn't feel that way at the time. After promising to stay in touch, Morgan ended the call, leaving Jordan with renewed confidence as he returned to the reporters. Meanwhile, across town, Rachel Winters sat in her office, blinds drawn, staring at her computer screen where the viral video played, on a loop. Her colleagues had been avoiding eye contact all morning, and her boss had called her in for a discussion about company values, scheduled for that afternoon. The video had revealed her at her worst, condescending, cruel, impatient, and now millions of people had witnessed it. Her phone had been flooded with messages, none of them supportive. Even her own mother had called to express disappointment. For the first time in years, Rachel was forced to truly see herself through others' eyes, and the reflection was deeply uncomfortable. As she watched Morgan Freeman's dignified intervention for perhaps the 20th time, something began to shift inside her, a recognition of her own failings that couldn't be rationalized away. Back at Lakeside Grocery, Sandra had called in extra staff to handle the unprecedented crowd. Jordan's register had a line stretching to the back of the store, with customers patiently waiting, some for over an hour, just to be checked out by him and offer words of encouragement. The store had become something of a pilgrimage site, with people driving from neighboring towns to express their support. Many brought gifts, cards, flowers, even home-baked goods, creating a growing collection in the break room. Children with Down syndrome and their families came specifically to meet Jordan, seeing in him a symbol of resilience and dignity. One mother, tears in her eyes, told Sandra, "You don't understand what it means to see someone like my son being celebrated like this. It gives us hope." As the day unfolded and the story continued to spread, what had begun as a moment of cruelty in a grocery store was transforming into something much larger, a conversation about dignity, about the power of standing up for others, and about seeing value in every person regardless of differences. And at the center of it all was Jordan Adams, a young man who had simply wanted to do his job well, now finding himself an unexpected ambassador for a message the world seemed desperate to hear. 1 week after the incident, Jordan arrived at Lakeside Grocery to find a bouquet of flowers waiting for him in the break room. The card attached read simply, "I'm sorry, Rachel Winters." He stared at the elegant handwriting, unsure how to feel. The memory of Rachel's cruel words had begun to fade, overshadowed by the overwhelming positivity that had followed. Yet seeing her name brought a complex mixture of emotions rushing back. "She dropped those off herself this morning," Sandra said, entering the break room. "Before we opened." Jordan nodded, carefully placing the card back on the flowers. "Did she say anything else?" "She asked if she could speak with you," Sandra replied. "I told her that would be entirely up to you." Jordan considered this as he put on his name tag, now adorned with a new pin that read, "Employee of the Month." The past week had transformed his life in ways he could never have imagined. The viral video had led to appearances on local news, an influx of supportive customers at the store, and even a scholarship offer from a community college foundation that had been moved by his story. But perhaps the most significant change was within Jordan himself. The nervous young man who had started his job just days ago had been replaced by someone who moved with quiet confidence, who made eye contact more readily, who spoke with conviction about his experiences. "What do you think I should do?" he asked. Sandra, genuinely curious about her perspective. Sandra leaned against the doorframe, considering her response carefully. "That's entirely your decision, Jordan. You don't owe her your forgiveness or your time. But sometimes," she added thoughtfully, "the conversations we least want to have are the ones that help us grow the most." Jordan nodded, tucking Rachel's card into his pocket. "I'll think about it." Out on the floor, Lakeside Grocery had settled into a new normal. While the initial flood of supporters had ebbed, there remained a steady stream of customers who specifically sought out Jordan's register. Many shared stories of their own experiences with discrimination or of loved ones with Down syndrome. Jordan listened to each one, finding that his own experience had given him a new capacity for empathy. During his lunch break, Jordan checked his phone to find an email from Morgan Freeman. They had kept in touch throughout the week, with the actor offering advice on handling the sudden attention and encouragement as Jordan navigated his unexpected role as an advocate. "Jordan," the email read, "I thought you might like to know that I mentioned your story in an interview yesterday. The interviewer asked what recent experience had moved me most, and I told them about witnessing your dignity in the face of cruelty. True strength isn't measured by how we treat those who can do something for us, but by how we treat those we perceive as different. You exemplified that strength, and it continues to inspire me. Keep standing tall." Jordan smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude for the unexpected friendship that had emerged from what could have been merely a humiliating experience. He was composing a reply when his phone rang, an unknown number. "Hello, Jordan speaking," he answered. "Jordan, this is Rachel Winters." The voice on the other end sounded hesitant, lacking the sharp edge he remembered. I don't know if you got my flowers, but I was wondering if we could meet. I'd like to apologize in person." Jordan's grip tightened on his phone. He had considered this possibility, had even rehearsed what he might say, but now that the moment was here, he found himself momentarily speechless. "You don't have to," Rachel added quickly, filling the silence. "I would completely understand. If you never wanted to see me again." Jordan took a deep breath. "No, I think that would be okay. When did you have in mind?" They arranged to meet at a small coffee shop near the grocery store after Jordan's shift ended. As he returned to work, he found himself surprisingly calm about the prospect of facing Rachel again. Something had shifted within him, where once there might have been anxiety or resentment. There was now a steady assurance that no words could diminish him the way they once had. When Jordan entered the coffee shop that evening, he spotted Rachel immediately. She sat alone at a corner table, hair pulled back, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, a stark contrast to the polished executive who had berated him a week ago. Her posture was tense, hands wrapped around her untouched coffee cup. As Jordan approached, she looked up, her expression a mixture of shame and nervousness. "Jordan," she said softly, starting to rise. "Thank you for coming." "It's okay," he replied, gesturing for her to remain seated as he took the chair opposite her. "You wanted to talk?" Rachel nodded, taking a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize, but I'm sorry feels completely inadequate for what I did." She looked down at her coffee. "The truth is, I've spent this past week seeing myself the way others saw me in that video, and I didn't recognize the person I've become." Jordan remained silent, allowing her to continue. "I was always taught to be efficient, to demand the best from others, to never accept excuses," Rachel explained, her voice growing quieter. "Somewhere along the way, I started viewing anyone who slowed me down as an obstacle rather than a person. It took seeing myself through 3 million pairs of eyes to realize how ugly that mindset is." She looked up, finally meeting his gaze. Directly. "I'm not telling you this to excuse what I did. There is no excuse. I'm telling you because I want you to know that you've changed me, Jordan. Your dignity in the face of my cruelty. It forced me to see myself clearly for the first time in years." Jordan considered her words carefully. "What happened that day? It wasn't just about me. It was never just about me." "What do you mean?" Rachel asked. "People like you have been unkind to people like me our whole lives," Jordan explained, his voice steady and thoughtful. "Usually no one says anything. Usually we just have to accept it. What made that day different wasn't me. It was that someone like Morgan Freeman decided it wasn't acceptable." Rachel nodded slowly, absorbing his insight. "You're right. And I'm part of the problem, or at least I was." She hesitated, then added, "I was fired from my job yesterday." Jordan's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Because of the video?" "Officially, it was for conduct unbecoming of a company representative," Rachel said with a humorless smile. "But yes, because of the video. My boss said I'd become a liability." Rather than satisfaction, Jordan felt an unexpected twinge of sympathy. I'm sorry about your job. Rachel shook her head. Don't be. Losing my job forced me to confront who I've become. I needed that wake-up call. She straightened slightly, a new resolve in her voice. I've accepted a position with a non-profit organization that works with adults with developmental disabilities. It's a pay cut and a complete career change, but I think it's where I need to be right now. Jordan studied her, searching for any hint of insincerity, but finding none. That's good, Rachel. I hope it helps you see things differently. It already has, she replied quietly. But Jordan, I need you to know something, whether you can forgive me or not, and you have every right not to. What I said about you that day was wrong. Not just morally wrong, but factually wrong. You are clearly capable, intelligent, and far more emotionally mature than I was. Jordan felt a weight he hadn't realized he was still carrying begin to lift from his shoulders. Thank you for saying that. As their conversation continued, Jordan was struck by the strange symmetry of life, how a moment of cruelty had sparked a transformation not just in himself, but in Rachel as well. They were two people forever connected by an incident. Neither had anticipated, both emerging changed on the other side. When they finally parted, Rachel hesitated before asking, "Do you think people can really change, Jordan?" Jordan thought of his own journey, from the insecure young man on his first day of work to the person he was becoming. He thought of Morgan, Freeman's words about crossroads and choices. "I think," he said slowly, "that people can change when they're brave enough to face who they've been and make different choices going forward." Rachel nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes as she extended her hand. Jordan took it, completing a circle of transformation that had begun with conflict and was ending improbably with understanding. As Jordan walked home under the evening sky, he felt a profound sense of peace. The Jordan who had started at Lakeside, grocery just over a week ago, would never have imagined sitting across from Rachel Winters, offering wisdom rather than seeking approval. That transformation, more than the viral video or the public support, was the true measure of how far he had come, and he knew with quiet certainty that it was only the beginning. 6 months had passed since that fateful day at Lakeside Grocery. The summer heat had given way to autumn crispness, and the store had been transformed with seasonal decorations, pumpkins and cornucopias replacing the summer produce displays. But the most significant transformation had nothing to do with the seasons. "Jordan, can you help Melissa at Register 3? Sandra called across the floor. "She's having trouble with a price override." "On it," Jordan replied, adjusting his name tag, which now read Shift Supervisor, before making his way to the register where a new employee, a young woman with autism, was looking increasingly flustered. "Hey, Melissa," he said warmly as he approached. "What seems to be the issue?" Relief washed over Melissa's face. "The coupon isn't scanning and I can't remember the override sequence." Jordan nodded, stepping beside her. "Let me show you again. It's easy once you get the hang of it." With patient guidance, he walked her through the process, explaining each step clearly until she successfully completed the transaction. The customer, an elderly woman, smiled approvingly. "Thank you both," she said, gathering her bags. "It's wonderful to see such teamwork." As Melissa helped the next customer with renewed confidence, Jordan glanced around the store with quiet pride. In the months following his viral moment, Lakeside Grocery had implemented a new hiring initiative, actively recruiting employees with diverse abilities. Jordan had been promoted to help train and mentor these new team members, drawing on his own experiences to create a supportive environment. The store had become something of a model for inclusive employment in the region with other businesses, sending representatives to learn from their approach. What had begun as one moment of standing up against discrimination had sparked lasting change throughout the community. Jordan checked his watch. 2 hours until the special event scheduled for that afternoon. He felt a flutter of nervous excitement at the thought of speaking in front of a crowd, something that would have been unimaginable to him just 6 months ago. At precisely 2 p.m., Jordan stood at the front of the store beside Sandra, and the district manager facing a small gathering of reporters, local officials, and community members. A banner hung overhead. Lakeside Grocery announces expansion of inclusive employment initiative. "Thank you all for coming today," the district manager began. "What started as a pilot program right here at our Lakeside location has proven so successful that we're expanding it to all 37 of our stores across the state." Applause rippled through the audience as he continued. "And we have someone very special here to help us make this announcement. Many of you already know him, either personally or from a video that touched millions of hearts earlier this year. Please welcome Jordan Adams, who will now serve as our Inclusive Employment Ambassador for the entire chain." The applause grew louder as Jordan stepped forward to the microphone. He took a deep breath, remembering Morgan Freeman's advice from their last conversation. "Just speak your truth, Jordan. That's all anyone can ask of you." 6 months ago, Jordan began, his voice clear and steady. "I was just trying to do my job when something unexpected happened. What could have been just a bad day turned into something much bigger, not because of anything special about me, but because people chose to stand up for what was right." He paused, looking out at the attentive faces. "Since then, I've learned that one moment can change everything. One person speaking up can start a wave that changes many lives." Jordan gestured to the new employees standing nearby, Melissa and 4 others with various disabilities, all wearing their Lakeside uniforms with pride. "Everyone deserves the chance to show what they can do," he continued. "In my new role, I'll be helping stores create environments where people of all abilities can succeed, because the truth is, we all have different strengths and challenges. The real disability isn't having Down syndrome or autism or any other condition. It's being in a world that doesn't make space for our differences." As Jordan concluded his remarks to enthusiastic applause, he spotted a familiar face toward the back of the crowd. Rachel Winters stood quietly, a smile of genuine respect on her face. Their paths had crossed occasionally in recent months, through her work at the non-profit, each encounter a little less awkward than the last, as they forged a unique relationship built on mutual growth. After the formal proceedings ended and the crowd began to disperse, Jordan was approached by a young couple with a toddler who had Down syndrome. "And we just wanted to thank you," the father said, emotion evident in his voice. "When we saw that video months ago, our son was only 2. We've worried so much about what his future might hold, how the world might treat him. You've given us hope that by the time he's your age, things might be different." Jordan crouched down to the little boy's level, offering his hand for a high five, which the child happily returned. "Things are already different," he told the parents as he stood, "and they'll keep getting better as long as we keep expecting better from each other." As the afternoon wound down, Jordan received a text message that brought an immediate smile to his face. "Turn around." He spun to find Morgan Freeman standing near the entrance, dressed casually with his signature cap pulled low. Despite his attempt at anonymity, several customers had already noticed him, whispers and excited glances following in his wake. "Morgan!" Jordan exclaimed, hurrying over to greet him with a handshake that turned into a warm hug. "I had no idea you were coming," Morgan smiled. "I wouldn't miss it. Besides, I was in town for a fundraiser and thought I'd stop by to see how my friend the ambassador is doing." "Still feels strange," Jordan admitted. "All of this from one day, one moment." Morgan nodded thoughtfully. "That's often how the most important changes happen, Jordan. Not in grand gestures or planned revolutions, but in single moments when someone decides that the way things are is not the way things should be." They walked together through the store, Morgan listening intently as Jordan excitedly explained the changes implemented over the past months, the specialized training programs, the accommodations made for different needs, the awareness workshops for all employees. "You've taken what happened and transformed it into something powerful," Morgan observed. "That's a rare gift." "I had good teachers," Jordan replied sincerely. "My mom always told me I could make a difference, and you showed me how to stand up with dignity." As they reached the exit, Morgan paused. "You know, when I stepped in that day, I never imagined all that would follow. I just knew I couldn't watch silently. But you, Jordan, you've done the hard work of turning one moment into a movement." Before leaving, Morgan placed a hand on Jordan's shoulder, his expression serious. Remember something important. This story was never about me. I may have been the one people recognized, but you were always the hero of this story. From the very first moment you showed up to do a job no one thought you could do. Jordan nodded, taking those words to heart. Thank you. For everything. As Morgan departed with a promise to stay in touch, Jordan returned to his duties, passing the wall of recognition where photos of employees were displayed. Among them was the picture of him and Morgan from that first day, but surrounding it now were dozens of others. New faces, diverse abilities, all part of the Lakeside family. Beside the photo display hung a framed quote, words that had become something of a mantra for the store. The true measure of any society can be found in how it treats those who are different. Jordan Adams, once defined by others through the lens of his disability, now stood as a mentor, leader, and advocate. The transformation wasn't just in his job title or responsibilities. It was in the quiet confidence with which he moved through the world, the certainty that his voice mattered, and the knowledge that one person truly could make a difference. As he helped a customer find an item in aisle 3, the same aisle where he had first noticed Morgan Freeman watching months ago, Jordan realized that while the viral video had captured one powerful moment, the real story was everything that came after. The daily choices, the small victories, the gradual shifts in perception that were changing the world, one interaction at a time. That was the true power of new beginnings, not that they happened once, but that they kept happening day after day, as long as people were brave enough to imagine a different way forward. And Jordan Adams was just getting started.